Welcome to the CMT webinar, high-tech webinar. This is our 6th webinar. It's also called the CXO briefing. We've got folks from Cisco joining us in the panel today. So the topic for today is the internet for the future. And we're talking about the internet for the future because, of all the great things that the internet has brought us so far. So as most of you know, over the last 10 years, the internet's had a big influence on us. We've got 5 billion people connected to the internet. It used to be 2 billion 10 years ago. We've got 11-fold increase in traffic on the internet. And as we're talking about traffic, I'll introduce my two panelists. The two panelists we have today are from Cisco. And why they're from Cisco? First, of course, they sponsored our paper, but also because Cisco, if you look at the amount of traffic that goes through the internet, Cisco routers, switches, or any Cisco gear supports about 70% of that traffic. And so they are literally the bulwark of the overall internet. So on that note, I'll introduce the two panelists we have. So I'll introduce, to begin with, we have Naveen Menon. Naveen heads the 5G and the hybrid cloud offer at the Strategic Execution Office at Cisco. He also is a board member at the Cisco Foundation. So welcome, Naveen.
Thank you.
So the other person we have on our panel is Matt Price. He's the Vice President of Subscriber Engineering and Mobility. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
So to begin with, I think there's a lot. Both of your titles are pretty loaded. So I'll let you sort of explain what your role is and how that's relevant for the topic we have at hand today. Naveen, maybe we'll start with you. Huh?
Yeah, so thanks, Sridhar. I mean, so my role actually is to launch offers that are cross-functional and cross-portfolio in Cisco. So as you know, many of you would know, Cisco is a large networking company, but we also have a huge franchise in cybersecurity across hybrid work, particularly in collaboration technologies, contact centers, and also in mass infrastructure, which is all of the infrastructure that powers the internet overall, the backbone of the internet. And then, of course, our core business in switching, routing, and wireless in the campus. Now, if you bring it all together with a services portfolio, we have a tremendous footprint across many different parts of our portfolio. And hence, when we look at how the evolving needs of our customers are changing, they're looking for more integrated, if you like, engineering solutions. And so my role is actually to identify those engineering solutions and bring them to the executive leadership team in Cisco, and also help our field teams launch offers that are more relevant to what customers want in the market today. That could include multiple parts of our portfolio, all brought together in a single offer. So that's what we call strategic offers. And I'm currently responsible for 3 strategic offers: full stack observability, hybrid cloud, and multi-cloud, with obviously a strong focus also on private 5G.
Great, thanks, Naveen. Matt?
So I'm a little bit more vertical than Naveen. I'm responsible for the engineering and operations of our mobile core, our private 5G solutions, and our mobile IoT solutions. So I'm looking at this from the perspective of how do we build the next generation mobile core for our SPs, as well as how do we build towards those new deployment models as a service, private 5G, and really leveraging the strong growth we're seeing in IoT. And so combining with what Naveen's doing, we're looking at how do we take these offers across the Cisco portfolio to help our CSPs really drive growth in a changing market.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Naveen. So quick introduction on myself. So I'm Sridhar. I'm a partner with Kearney based out of our Silicon Valley office. I do a lot of work on technology in general, but mostly with service providers and with technology companies on 5G and cloud. So that's what I'm focused on, and that's why I'm here. So we'll get into the discussion around the future of the internet, or the internet for the future itself. So just to begin with, I think the way, if you have read our paper, the discussion. So if you've read our paper, you would see what we're talking about when we're talking about the internet for the future is the internet has served us really, really well in the past. If you look at where we are and what the internet's done for us, it's ushered the digital age for us. There are more than 65% of the people in the world who are now connected to the internet. I did a lot of my previous work along with Naveen in Asia, where we've seen the impact that it's had on millions of the population, bringing them into the fold of what we call digital right now. It has helped us go through the pandemic, stay productive through the pandemic. And as we look to the future, we look towards technologies like Web 3.0, Metaverse, and Industry 4.0 with automated factories, etc., coming through. That's likely to change the way we live, the way we work. So, but having said that, when you look at how the internet is, the situation of the internet right now, you would see that there are parts of it that are broken. For example, I think there is equitable access that's been always an issue. So to connect the last 35% of the population is going to take a lot more capital and a lot more effort from everyone in the ecosystem to make that happen. If you look at some of the outcomes in terms of who's derived the most benefits from the internet, that's again not been as equitable. So what we wanted to do today was to unpack some of the challenges, talk about what a future vision of the internet looks like, and also I think talk about, because the core of the paper is on technology, so also talk about what role does technology have to play to achieve that future of the internet. So that's sort of the sequence of the discussion today. So I'll begin with some of the challenges faced by the internet today. And I'll maybe start off with Naveen. Naveen, I think you, on your role, especially in the Cisco Foundation, but also in your role as you're coming out with offers for your customers, you would have seen what's broken on the internet today. And as I said earlier, Cisco gets to see 70% of the traffic that goes on the internet. So it will be good to get your thoughts on what are some of the challenges that the current internet, that the internet of the today sees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, I mean, you mentioned access. So access is a major issue. I mean, on a global level, it was estimated about 37% of the world's population, or 2.9 billion people, still have never used the internet. This is coming from the recent ITU report measuring digital development. That's pretty significant. And of that 2.9 billion people, 96% of them live in developing countries, which points to your issue around the capex that's going to be needed to deploy. If we do capex models in the future, it will be very expensive. And then, of course, there's a gender imbalance as well. So 62% of men and only 57% of women have used the internet globally. And this is even more stark in the least developed countries, where only 31% of men and 19% of women can get online. There's a difference in urban-rural populations as well. So 76% in urban versus 39% of rural access the internet. And there's a difference in generational ability as well. So 71% of the world's population is being used, is using the internet in the 15 to 24 age group, but 57% across other age groups. So the older generation, obviously, are less likely to benefit from the internet. So access is one issue. Second big issue is sustainability. Resource consumption is very high. Internet generates about 2 to 3% of all power consumption worldwide, which corresponds to basically the energy footprint equivalent to like the third largest consuming nation in the world, and also equivalent to the airline industry. The electronic waste is massive and steadily rising. About 53.6 million metric tons was produced. That's a lot, and emissions is rising. So 2% of the global greenhouse gases are generated from the ICT sector. There's many other issues around economic equality, for example. So geographic equality, its industry is concentrated amongst 2 countries primarily. Industry concentration around 5 to 6 global players. Online safety has been an issue. Privacy, security, and digital harm, and then finally, bias has been an issue as well. So facial recognition tools rely heavily on machine learning, and algorithmic data is being generated across the world, but the algorithmic data is not necessarily representative of the population that is in the planet today. So there's major issues across many dimensions right now.
Fantastic. I think so. I mean, one of the things you brought about was the availability of equitable access to to the population around the world. So or in our work that we've done, and I think we've done this together too, is we've seen the role that local service providers, communication service providers have to play in delivering that equitable access. And I think what we've seen, and I think our paper talks to this too, is that the economics of the local service providers, how challenged that's been, has been one of the biggest challenges to probably achieve that last 35%. So Matt, maybe a question to you as to, because you do a lot of work with service providers, how have you seen them sort of, how has this challenge manifested for service providers?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a couple of big things that come into the challenges right now in terms of the ability of getting equitable access and affordability, right? So we're undergoing an enormous transformation, especially in the mobility industry, as we drive into 5G networks. And as we continue to push more 5G technology out, we are being forced, and our CSP partners are being forced to make significant capital investments, both in their cores and as they get out to the edge, to be able to enable that type of increased bandwidth, increased usability, new radio technology, new core technology, all of those investments. At the same time, we are not seeing similar growth in revenues. So we're being faced with a hundreds of billions of dollars of capital investment around the world that are not being paired with increase in growth and increase in revenue. And as you look at some of these new technologies in 5G, where the radios are much more powerful and have much more bandwidth, but at the same time offer somewhat less coverage, getting coverage out to that last mile from our service providers becomes very, very challenging. So we're relying on a mix of investment in 5G and in last mile technologies, both of which are extremely expensive. And so it's going to take both the CSPs to make significant investment and public-private partnerships to drive really the equitable access to those last percentages in around the world. And even here in the United States, we don't have perfect coverage. I personally suffer from being in a location where there isn't good broadband access, right? So I'm in the office today because I don't have reliable access at home necessarily to be able to dial into this. And I live in the heart of Silicon Valley. So, when you leave Silicon Valley and get out into the rest of the world, the challenges only become more and more amplified.
Thanks, Matt. So, Navi, just back to you on some of the challenges that we are looking at in terms of the internet. When you see an internet for the future, and I think as Cisco, given you are sort of a fundamental building block around that internet, where do you see the future for this for the internet? So, how does the internet for the future look in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the highest level, I mean, I think it kind of hits 6 big pillars. So I would say, firstly, the access for all. So the internet must address and be available and affordable to all. That's everyone on the planet, okay, and not excluding anyone on the planet. Secondly, it has to be sustainability by design. So when we build in the technologies, then we should address carbon neutrality, maximum circularity into the design of the internet. The third point would be around resilience. We need to deliver minimum guaranteed availability and service levels for everyone who's accessing the internet. Those minimum standards can change over time. Obviously, they should improve, but those minimum standards should be available so that Matt, for example, as he mentioned, even in the heart of Silicon Valley, he can get access to that minimum availability where he lives. The fourth is around equality and economic distribution. So I feel like the current economic model is actually broken in the way that economic value is being generated, and we should make sure that the economic value generated in the future benefits and is equally distributed, not equally distributed, but should be a portion to the players that are participating in the internet. Those could be individual people, entities, corporations, governments, countries. But right now, there's a disproportionate skew of value attributed to a few players in the internet versus the others. And that is unfortunately unfair at this point in time. The fifth pillar would be around safety and trustworthy. I really believe that we need to have data privacy taken to a different level, and safety from cybersecurity threats and digital harm addressed proactively and consistently across the planet. And then lastly, it should be free from bias. So we have to address inherent bias in the system, which influences future relevant offerings, like, for example, our AI/ML systems. So the bias has to be eliminated, and that comes from having a larger data set to work with that is more representative of the people who are actually accessing the internet or should access the internet. So there's 6 things, right? Accessibility, sustainability, resiliency, economic distribution, safety and trustworthiness, and bias, free from bias. That to me is a vision for the future from a design principle standpoint.
No, great. Thanks, Naveen. Now, again, I think going back to the role around what communication service providers or telcos have to play, they play a big role in, I think, at least 4 out of those different metrics that you put together, or different parameters that you put together for that future of the internet. I want to switch to the role of that technology plays in this, because I think that's what we are here to discuss. The There are 2 things that I think we want to touch upon. One is some of these outcomes that we are looking for in terms of the future for the internet, how a technology plays a role there. And second, of course, address the question around the CSPs, the communication service providers themselves, and how technology can help them, enable them to help achieve those outcomes. So maybe, Matt, would be good to talk through some of the key technology changes that you expect coming through the stack that will help achieve some of those outcomes.
That sounds good. Yeah, I think if you look across, the stack from the very bottom at transport up through edge, O-RAN, up to, as we look at, intelligent OSS, BSS, right? There's a huge shift across the board in all of these technologies, really into driving more cloud native and automated delivery, right? Whether you're talking about 5G, whether you're talking about RAN technologies, it's all being driven by how do we look at these solutions in a more disaggregated world where all of the technologies are essentially running on more commodity infrastructure that's allowing us to run software to drive the outcomes, right? So that's a huge component of what we're seeing as the change for the future, and that's allowing our CSPs to really revisit the delivery models that they're looking at, and both in terms of how they consume into as a service and how they deliver network as a service models. But it does require really significant changes in terms of how we build our teams and how we build our technologies, right? As you get more disaggregated, things like Naveen was mentioning, kind of full stack observability and the ability to automate through the system become absolutely critical pillars to how we build and design networks. Right, so it's not as about the feeds and speeds as much anymore as the ability to actually deliver and get those feeds and speeds where they need to go. And to do that economically is going to require an enormous investment from on all our parts in terms of how we look at automation and visibility across stacks where things used to be in one place and easy to see. Now it requires significantly more intelligence in our observability stacks to allow us to be able to deliver the resiliency that Naveen mentioned to the market.
I think it's such an important point that Matt made, that there's, in order to kind of run proprietary, if you like, or no, I shouldn't use proprietary, sort of new generation, new software stack on more commoditized hardware would require a lot of opening up of existing closed systems.
Yeah.
Right. So there's lots of hardware systems which run on proprietary OSs, multiple different OSs even, depending on whether you are looking at the access network, radio network, maybe even the service layer, or aggregation layer, transport networks. There's lots of proprietary operating systems from multiple vendors. And so, I think just extrapolating from what he said, that would mean a significant change in the way hardware and software are delivered to service providers.
And it also would hopefully break them from what is a 5 to 10 year capex cycles that they go through. So that'll change too. Uh, just just wanted to double click on that point because there's 5G is expected to deliver a lot of that across the stack, especially taking it up to the access network. Uh, there's obviously a lot of discussion around what 5G can do and what it is doing right now, because obviously 5G hasn't delivered those sort of benefits. So Matt, maybe you want to just talk through, it'll be great to hear your opinion on how 5G will help or not help in that regard.
Well, I think I think if you look at 5G, there's a couple of different things, right? So from a business perspective for our CSPs, what we're seeing is significant growth in enterprise use cases and really in IoT, right? You're seeing strong, multi double-digit growth across the board, across the world, as we get more and more technology onto the edge and onto the enterprises, right? And that's really what we see as the biggest growth opportunity for 5G and the biggest use cases that offer revenue opportunity to the CSPs, right? The challenge that we see right now with 5G is while it does offer incredible speed and performance for our consumer markets, it doesn't change the economics significantly for our CSP partners, right? So that's really a big challenge that we're seeing is the majority of the revenue today is coming from our consumer networks. 5G is going to require a significant investment to get to true 5G SA networks everywhere, but the revenue is really future-based in how we're looking at with our SPs in terms of enterprise and IoT type use cases. So the question then becomes, how do you get, to your point, away from this huge 5 to 10 year major investment cycle? And I think what we're starting to see is more and more of the components in the overall CSP solution are being delivered as a service. And that's, when we look at how we deliver our private 5G solution, it's delivered entirely through our partners and through our SPs as a service to reduce the significant upfront investment in CapEx and allow us to move much more quickly to market and allow us to adapt more quickly to market versus traditional models.
Fantastic. Matt, the other question around 5G was, I think we've spoken about this in our paper too, is around these B2B2X models. I think you mentioned private 5G being one of them, which enables you to provide private 5G as a service to the service providers, then who can then provide it out to enterprises. Again, I think with 5G, there is the discussion around network slicing and what that the ability that brings to service providers and potentially end customers to provide differentiated services. So it'll be great to have you just talk a little bit about that and what that holds.
Sure. It's one of the, kind of when I, highlighted, kind of briefly, I skimmed over kind of the enterprise use cases, and slicing and some of these technologies offer some really interesting opportunities to the market, right? So if you think about the application developer in the enterprise today, the network exists and it's used to transport what they're doing. The applications themselves rarely interact with and rarely get much visibility from the networks. As you look at the kind of the future of what we're seeing in 5G with the 3GPP designs really from the get-go to give good visibility to our applications, as well as the ability for our applications to actually drive the performance of the network. We see some really interesting use cases being developed in enterprise, right? So now the application provider can have the network being delivered at the edge and leveraging kind of network exposure type technologies in the 5G core can make decisions about where their application runs in their hyperscaler and what their application does based on the performance of the network. And we're seeing use cases where can actually drive slice creation and QoS decision making from the application that gets fed back into the network. And the ability of the CSPs to provide this visibility and to provide this flexibility in their networks allows them to monetize performance and monetize the edge as they go through and create it, as well as to create great partnerships both with their customers and with the hyperscalers to help deliver those edge services. So it's really the realization of value for the enterprise customer base being driven by application slicing, QoS type solutions are really opening up the market for what service providers can do to re-envision the market with 5G.
Great, thanks. Thanks a lot, man. We've just opened up, just for everyone, we've just opened up the Q&A, so you can go type your questions on Slido. The one question I had was just around the role of hyperscalers, because they're playing a bigger and bigger role in the ecosystem, the internet ecosystem now, the internet value chain, if you will. Naveen, maybe just your points of what you've seen, what's interesting, what looks like what's interesting in the role that they're playing, and what impact do you think they would have on the future of the internet? Huh?
Well, clearly, I mean, the hyperscalers have played a tremendous role, in delivering services for, customers who want to scale up new operations or scale up businesses quickly, right? Or new services or new revenue models. And that's been actually a key value driver for a lot of hyperscalers. In the service provider space, obviously we see them also playing a very strong role, a partnership role with, service providers, but also with, vendors and other players in the ecosystem, because they play in different parts of the value chain, right? I mean, so I think that, it's always hyperscalers tend to be our customers, but also our partners in many ways. And the same thing I would say if I was on the service provider side of things, they would be our provider, but they would also be potentially even a customer, or a competitor as well.
Yeah.
So clearly it's a market that is seeing lots of movement across the value chain. But as I was kind of pointing out earlier on, I would love to see a lot more equitable distribution of value, economic value, because then that enables other players in the value chain to innovate, because capital flows to other players in the value chain who can also invest in their own innovation capability to deliver services for end customers. Which sometimes, if your money flows too much to one part of the whole industry value chain, you end up with a very concentrated industry structure, and then there's not enough competition and therefore not enough innovation. So I would like to see that happening as, hyperscalers and service providers try to dominate, the delivery of internet services.
Yeah, I think to that point, Naveen, I think it's really interesting when you talk about some of the concentration, right? We'd love to see more distribution of those hyperscaler footprints, right? As we talk about the ability for applications to drive QoS and performance and last mile connectivity, if at the end of the day, your content is stored, in very, very concentrated locations around the globe, all that performance is going to be lost at the end of the day, right? And so as we get more and more use cases that are driven by high-speed connectivity and transportation use cases, especially, which really look at high-speed connectivity as an opportunity to really drive safety, the distribution of content to those edge locations is absolutely critical, and that's an area where we're seeing really, really intense concentration today.
No, I agreed, Matt. I think that's again something that's been an increasing trend. Something that been an increasing trend in the internet. It has been that concentration that we've seen. We just have a question on Slido that's come in, so I'll just read that out. So at the beginning, you spoke about access and how many people don't have access today. What will cause a step change in ubiquitous internet access? Naveen, maybe you want to start with that?
I mean, I would say, obviously spectrum plays a key role, right? There's the very high fixed cost in order to deploy networks. So spectrum plays an initial key role, regulatory cost. But on top of that, I think, if we can move more towards deployment of mobile infrastructure into areas where, there's not much connectivity, then I think that would obviously create, a more affordable way of deploying internet to the masses. And then, of course, moving from, business, sort of CapEx-driven models into more kind of on subscription or as a service kind of business models would also reduce the kind of entry barriers for new players to come in and deploy networks where maybe other players would have found it difficult to deploy networks. But Matt, I'm sure, who has a much better answer than that, or maybe can add to that from a technology perspective or from a business perspective.
Yeah, sounds good. I don't know that I'd have a much better answer than that. I think you nailed it, Naveen, but I think kind of that's actually an area where we're seeing real progress today is with 5G, and as the infrastructures continue to be built up to support it, the availability of last mile home-based broadband over mobile connectivity is really opening up some great opportunities, right? It really hasn't been possible in previous generations to provide real true home service off of cellular connectivity. But we're seeing that become a real use case that's being delivered and delivered well with 5G today. I think that opens up, where you have these these less dense areas where the cost of running fiber to the home is just absolutely prohibitive. You have the kind of the lack of density necessary to be able to sustain a true mobile internet presence there. So I think that's a huge step function, and I think Naveen really nails the as a service model, right? So a lot of the forced upfront capex investments that are having to be made, prevent some of these last mile technologies and some of this mobile technologies being deployed. As more of us move to as a service delivery models, moving a more shared burden on the capex investments across the board, I think that will help with that step function across the world.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Matt. We've got another question. So the question is, what sort of value creation are we talking about, and what can be done to build a profitable ecosystem?
I can start. I mean, I think if you look at the value chain, between, say, let's take the starting point being content, is what Matt described that earlier, like content maybe starting it, and then the sort of network, and then through to sort of the application layer or software and services, and then into applications. There's a lot of online access into applications and software. The distribution of, if you look at the distribution of the economic value, probably like 50-60% of that value was actually in the service provider domain and the infrastructure side of things back in, maybe 10 years ago. Whereas now the online services, the hyperscalers, software and services probably take the lion's share, 60, 70, maybe 80% of the value, right? And content providers are struggling to sort of monetize content on the internet. And the valuations of those players are actually much lower. And they would trade at like 5 to 10x of price to earnings, whereas software and services would be trading at like 40, 50 PE. So clearly the valuation has shifted, and the total pie has become larger for some players operating, a small group of players operating in the space around software and services and applications, and I just feel like that is something that needs to be addressed at some point, right? It's either we recognize that this industry concentration exists, but we are not necessarily doing enough to ensure a more equitable distribution of value. In terms of what could be done, I would say if you are, like, I'm a big believer in innovation and the power of innovation over sort of regulation. I mean, clearly the answer could be, in some countries you could just regulate and you could tax and you could provide punitive measures, right, to redistribute value. But I actually believe much more in the power of innovation. So if you're a small business and small company and you see this, actually you can actually experiment with new business models, experiment with new services, and roll out new services to gain market share, and then scale up those services over time. And especially now, if you've got access to the internet and can, roll out with a few customers, you'll be amazed at how quickly, if the service has got real value, that word of mouth and customer bases can grow exponentially, and that can actually be the starting point. So I really believe that innovation is possibly one of the best opportunities ahead for redistributing value.
Great. Thanks, Naveen. Matt, I have a question just on that value creation aspect. I have a question for you. One, if you look at how the hyperscalers, we spoke about them earlier, what they've done, they've been able to do in terms of value creation. They've generated, they're still infrastructure providers, if you will,
Yep.
but they have enabled an ecosystem to grow. Uh, they've enabled an ecosystem to grow, and they've been able to generate value as a part of that enablement role that they played. You would argue that the service providers have not done that, or they've not been able to do that with the infrastructure that they have. Do you see that changing with with virtualization and 5G coming in?
I think you see virtualization and 5G kind of are underpinning technologies that enable the CSPs to offer more and more value and more services. I think the biggest piece of the change I see there is the relationships between the CSPs and their enterprises, right? So a lot of the CSP to enterprise relationship today tends to be give me access to the network so I can get to my hyperscaler. As you have the ability to offer more innovative use cases and features out of the network itself, you can now really participate more actively in the value chain, right? You can now provide, automated secure access between the hyperscaler and your end locations. You can provide security based on the data itself. You can provide more, guaranteed QoS and closer access to your end content through MEC and edge use cases, right? The disaggregation of the CSP networks from being big monolithic technologies to now being distributed technology that allows you to put components at the edge closer to your customers really enables you to offer additional services. And the most important and most valuable thing is that the CSPs have today, they have the customer relationships. Now, are we able to drive enough value out of them at the current model? No, but those relationships are absolutely critical to leveraging the new technology investments to drive that value chain up.
Perfect. I think that's exactly I think how they need to start thinking about it, on how exactly they can generate value out of it. We've got one other question that's come up, and this probably is going to be our last question, even we have 3 minutes left. Which technology trend is expected to be the most impactful in driving change towards the internet for the future? So, Naveen, you want to start with that, or should I let Matt take that?
Because otherwise, I think one of us is going to be left with not much to say. So for me, who runs both engineering and operations, right? To me, I drive a lot of as-a-service delivery. The answer is cloud native technology, and that is changing the way we build and deliver our infrastructure holistically. It's changing the way we have to skill and build our teams to do it, and it's enabling great amounts of innovation to move very, very quickly. And if we can leverage it for good and do it well, it really creates a tidal shift in the industry.
I would agree with that. I mean, look, if I could say, in addition to that, if we could find a way to address, the sustainability of the technology and on the footprint of the earth, right? I think that would be something that would be very, very important to address as well, because as we start to consume more data and we start to consume more energy, we need to, and cloud native technology does do that. We have to balance kind of the environmental impact as well. And it's amazing to think that, in such a short period of time, the internet is now generating close to 2 to 3% of global emissions. That's equivalent to the airline industry, but it's rising a lot faster than the airline industry. So we're going to be taking over like big chunks of the total energy consumption. So, and that's where I think, Cisco has played a big role. Like the technology that we develop has really got fantastic kind of impact on energy conservation, and that has to be done in design, like has to be built into design going forward. So absolutely cloud native technology, environmentally and ecologically sustainable. I would add that too as well.
Yeah, good point, Naveen.
Brilliant. Brilliant. We got both your answers in for that one. Huh? So that's great. So first of all, thanks a lot, Matt, Naveen. I think we've reached the end of our session today. It's been great. Thanks for those insightful comments. Thanks for being here. And thank you for everyone for attending that. We will be in touch. We will get all the key notes out of this out to all of you. So thank you again. Have a great Tuesday. Thank you. Bye.